All right, welcome to the Scotty P podcast, man. I'm here with Jason Soliz, one of the premier black belts, man. You're always competing. I've commentated several of your matches on Elevate. I've seen you compete on Fury. I've seen you do a bunch of the local cards. And man, you win a lot. And you're one of the mainstays here, I would say, as far as like one of the top schools to be at. It seems like you guys are bringing teams to all the local competitions.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thank you. And it's awesome. I think we reached out through, we talked to each other a couple of months ago, right? And then,
yeah, I stopped you on one of the elevates because I saw, man, you just, I think you had a match against Matt Brooks, I want to say, or maybe it was one of the black belts, man. You finished.
I've matched Matt Brooks before. He's good. I think it was, was it Zach? I think it might've been Zach. Or I'm not entirely sure just because I was trying to think back. We have so many events going on all the time, with the MMA and grappling stuff all the time. I'm just like trying to think, but I do remember the faces and I remember the conversations a lot of times. But yeah, I was excited, man, when you said that. I was like, oh, cool. I always like talking and doing stuff like that. So
yeah, you had a killer match and you got a super quick submission. I can't remember what it was. It might've been like a bow and arrow choke, but you got a super fast finish. And I was like, man, this guy's really good.
Thank you.
So yeah, man, kind of like, I know that you've been, for those who don't know, you've been a martial artist like your whole life. Your dad is like the mainstay of the martial arts community. He's always reffing the MMA fights, kind of see him everywhere. And you guys both run Third Coast MMA?
Yes, sir.
Very cool. And yeah, man, kind of just like let the audience know kind of like how you started and where you came up from.
I've been engaged with the whole entire process with my father since I was probably maybe 6 or 7 years old. We started originally, I guess, not necessarily as just like jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is something that kind of came a little bit later, but actually we had a strong influence by I'm not sure if you're familiar with like Jeet Kune Do. We had a huge, and still do, a huge just journey into that realm of just almost like what was kind of early MMA. Like when we first started, there was stuff like the pan craze, and we still had stuff like the Shudo in Japan and things like that. We started early on with some of that stuff, and I got a lot of exposure into the different mindsets and different styles of grappling like early on. And I think that's probably what kind of influenced me to really kind of take to jiu-jitsu and just grappling in general. When I was little, I used to watch my dad go a lot to compete in professional boxing. He was a professional boxer when we first started too. And so I got to see him go to like gyms and watch guys do sparring rounds and things like that in the gym with him. And then watching him also coach on the other side of it. So I kind of got exposure to coaching early on. I was probably in a couple of places that I shouldn't have been when I was a little kid too. And some like really rough places watching some of the boxing matches and stuff like that. But it was still interesting to watch and see the interaction and exchanges between the two people, because the way I kind of saw it back then was it changed to the way I see it now, just because of the whole coaching mentality behind it. But it was really interesting to me just because you would see the boxing, and even then I think I kind of just started recognizing different concepts and principles just because of the way we were brought up with the whole Jeet Kune Do stuff. And it was very apparent that there was like almost like grappling within the boxing. And I was like, this is interesting. Cause I used to grow up watching like a lot of like, 70s, 80s boxing era stuff, early 90s and everything like that. Chavez, of course, being one of my favorites, but then also watching somebody like Roberto Duran, who almost made it look like it was like a wrestling match half the time, and then, of course, Tyson comes into the picture and you start to see these low maneuvers and stuff like that. And it was really interesting to watch boxing from that perspective. But then we had a lot of exposure early on into guys like Dan Inosanto. I'm not sure if you recognize the name or anything.
No, not him.
Dan Inosanto was I guess probably surviving, I don't know if you want to say lineage of Bruce Lee, I guess, where he started doing a lot of like Filipino martial arts and things like that. So we have a strong influence from that as well. And there's a lot of like hand fighting and like weapons work that goes on with grappling in that realm. So I learned things like the first time I learned a double leg actually was a stick move. I was actually learning to stick disarm and then learn to wrap it around the guy's legs and, topple him off his back. So I was like, oh, those interesting. I always thought that was really cool that you could use the weapons to get close to somebody and throw them to the floor.
Right.
So I for some reason, I always thought the grappling was like a lot cooler just because I liked the idea of the touching hand movements and how to use the most minimal effort possible to get the most maximum results.
Right.
I always thought that was like really interesting, even as a little kid. And then of course, as we got a little bit older, I started venturing into more of the jiu-jitsu realm just because it was there early on in the 90s, but it was still kind of relatively considered underground.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being around some of those groups early on. Like we used to train with some guys out of Indiana, specifically with Mackenzie Dern's father, Megaton.
Yep.
And then we had a little bit of some delving into with Eric Paulson out on the West Coast. And then we had a little bit of influence from, I guess, some catch as catch can and Japanese combat wrestling and things like that were kind of prevalent in some of the circles that we frequented with the Jeet Kune Do guys, because at the time that was kind of our MMA. So we started to see a lot of the striking influenced by a lot of the grappling, and then, vice versa, the grapplers coming to learn some of the striking. So then we had, of course, like Pride and all that stuff start coming in. And I remember being a little kid waiting up till like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to watch the Pride cards in Japan, just because the pay-per-view at the time, like the time frames didn't match up.
Right.
And just kind of like watching these guys just go at it in there. And it was always interesting too, because I think that kind of captured me as far as interest, just because in Japan, they love the showmanship, and it looked like comic book matchups to me, where you'd see somebody like, what's the football player?
Yeah, you're talking about Bob Sapp?
Bob Sapp, yeah. You'd see Bob Sapp going against like, what is it in the movie Choke? Yuki Nakai.
Yeah.
And you're like, what the hell? Like, how's that a legal matchup?
Yeah.
And then Nakai wins, and you're like, what the heck just happened?
Yeah.
So it was like early on watching stuff like that. And then, of course, turned me into a little bit of a nerd, and I got into watching some of the like combat stuff for anime and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, what kept me interested in the most part. And the fact that my father was always doing it, and I always used to see people around him all the time that genuinely were interested in doing it, as well as learning it and training it all the time. So I kind of just wanted to be a part of that, just because I liked it. I didn't realize how much I would like it. You don't really look at any of that stuff until like hindsight years later, that you're like, oh my God, I really enjoy this. And now it's kind of like, I'm looking back and I'm like, man, I really got to see a lot of stuff early on growing up that was just so influential on me as where I am now, that I guess not necessarily that I took it for granted, but I'm just like, man, I'm really happy I got to experience that stuff. It was very unique.
Yeah.
Because it was early on MMA, I guess, if you want to consider it in the US and Texas and Southwest region, that was kind of what we experienced. And then, of course, I started doing my own stuff. I think I really started interest in jiu-jitsu or in grappling, probably competition-wise, around the age of like 10, 9 or 10. And I was also a fat kid. So I had a lot of baby fat, had to lose a lot of weight. And that was kind of a way just to kind of start, I guess, moving around, keeping myself healthy. And I did football, basketball, all that stuff, but it wasn't the same.
Right.
It wasn't as physical as I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And, my dad was also a semi-pro basketball player at one point. And one of the funny things about all that is that they used to have so many altercations on the court because it was before a lot of the touching rules or the foul rules that would come into play. So there'd always be fights and stuff like that. And that was just a way for me to sit there and be like, that looks really sloppy. Or, hey, you probably could have double-legged the guy in there and just held him down. Or, oh man, that's, these guys are so tired fatigue-wise that they have no idea what they're doing. So it's kind of like as a kid watching some of that stuff, maybe a little bit odd, I guess, thinking that a kid's watching some of that, but I got to see it. And then, of course, I tried to play those sports. Like I said, it just wasn't, I didn't like the idea of number one, not being that physical, but number two, I didn't like the idea of relying on other people to get a job done that I knew I could do myself.
Right.
And it was, I don't know, it bugged me to watch that, like the team sports and stuff. I still think that what we do is a team sport in a different way, but it's out there in the ring competition wise, it's you versus the other guy.
Right.
So the teams behind you, all that work was done, but you're out there, you're on the you're in the hot seat at that point. And I always enjoyed that, the stress of it and all that stuff. And then watching my father do all that stuff as we were coming up, and I kind of just took to it. And then for a while I was doing jiu-jitsu, doing boxing, and competing in a little bit of Muay Thai. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, I did full contact karate as well, but I always used to get disqualified from the karate matches.
Yes. No, what?
We were taught old school, like full contact style karate. You know, back when it was played on like ESPN and stuff like that. That's the way I was taught. But I was also taught a little bit of the influence from the Muay Thai. So when I would throw a round kick, it was a round kick to hurt, a round kick to drop somebody. I didn't know anything about excessive force. And that was the thing I used to get flagged for all the time, man. I got kicked out of my first like 5 competitions for excessive force.
Dang.
And I was like, what the heck? Like, I thought we were supposed to hit the guy. As a little kid, I'm just like, you're supposed to hit the guy. He's not supposed to come back. If you can hit him and stop him, that's the idea, right? I didn't know it was a sport and it's supposed to be a points match, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember that. And then just being like, man, I'm just going to wait till the grappling rounds come. I'm just going to go after everybody. And that was kind of my thing. Cause they used to have a lot of that too early on in the karate matches and stuff in the team or the karate tournaments around here. It used to be, there's like a portion that was stand up and there was a portion that was ground. And that's where I started competing in jiu-jitsu, was at the karate tournaments. And then it just kind of progressed from there into what I was doing. And I think right around 2016, if I remember correct. No, way sooner than that. 2008. 2007, 2008. I think that was my first time going to an international competition. It was IBJJF. And this is before like all the reaping rules and all the stuff that they threw in there, just to kind of bar people. And that kind of, later on, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, just because I just, too many restrictions on some of that stuff. But I went in there and I got my first gold at Pans with the straight ankle lock to finish in the final. And I was like, oh, okay, like I could do this. You know, that was my first thought process, is like, I'm at this level, I could do this. And so I kind of stuck with grappling for a while.
What belt were you at this time?
I was a blue belt. I was a blue belt and got the gold at Pan.
Hell yeah.
And then went into purple belt. And at purple belt, I had a pretty good competition experience. I think I was like, we had a thing one time actually that was, I think we had a 2-year contract with, it was early on Fuji Sports, but they were still under the Zebra LLC or something like that. I forget what it was. But when we were at Zebra, they used to do these things where they would take 3 of us around. One of the early on guys was Julian Vega, who I believe still trains. I'm not sure what team he's at now, but I want to say he's teaching a lot more. He's taking on a coaching role. So he was a good guy. And then I'm trying to think, there was one more guy that was involved in there with us. And that name's slipping my mind right now, just because it was so long ago. And then of course myself, and there was 3 of us that were on this team, and we would travel around, you know, kind of Southern US doing like just tournaments. Fuji would hold a tournament, we'd be there, we'd compete, and if we won, we won. But then they started doing these things where they started doing challenge matches. So when we'd show up there, we'd sit at the booth and we'd wait for anybody that thought that they had the gall to kind of come up there and say, hey, I can take out your top guys. Okay, you take out our top guys. They had a bag ready that had like rash guards and fight shorts and gis and belts and MMA gear and all kinds of stuff in this duffel bag, all brand new stuff, basically to push the product line. And it was really nice stuff, like high quality gear. So of course everybody sees that stuff up there like, oh, I could get that little guy. I could get that little guy. And they used to pick which one of us that they wanted to go against. We'd go out there, we'd wipe the floor with them or submit them in a couple minutes. And then, oh, okay, we'd come back, they'd give us a bonus. They'd throw us like some team gear, like a rash guard or something like that on top of that. And that became the incentive. I was like, okay, so we just started going around doing that for a while. And then I think I went to Worlds that year. I think it might have been 2011. I'm not sure. Might have been 2011. I think we had the biggest, this is before they started closing the divisions, where you had to qualify to make like Worlds and things like that. But I think we had the biggest division of the year or decade, something like that. where it was like close to like 500 plus competitors just in the purple belt division alone.
Dang.
And I ended up fighting like 8 matches just to get through the bracket, just to get to finals. And I got to the finals, and the guy was he refused to come off his back playing guard. I was relatively good at guard, I guess, early on, but I started to realize that you needed to be on top, you needed to pass, you needed to threaten everything, be good at everything. So I started trying to pass a lot, and I thought I had passed the guy. I thought I had done enough, and then I looked at the scoreboard and it didn't show, and I was like, what the hell's going on? And then I realized, like, oh, there's some politics in play here. And they didn't give me the stuff that I needed, because I ended up finding out that the other guy was Cobrina's top prospect. That's the guy they wanted to win. I was like, oh, okay, that's the reason they stuck him on the easy side of the brackets, and they stuck me on the hard thing.
Yeah.
Right. Up until that point, I choked everybody out to get to the final. But yeah, I was kind of ticked about that. And then I ended up getting, I think, second. But it was still a good experience to kind of get to that area, get second, and then find out that the only reason that they could stop you is because they had to play politics against you. So I felt pretty good about that.
Yeah.
And then at that time, also we were working with the late Octavio Cotto. That's our instructor. That's kind of our lineage that we passed through. And he had a lot of influence on the ideas and stuff like that of how we kind of approach stuff that we do now, just because his influence was not necessarily that there's anything new in jiu-jitsu. It's just, how are you going to make it so that your body and everybody else's body can perform the same movement? It has to be specifically felt and tailored towards individual, but it's also got to be principles and concepts that are universal.
Right.
And the funny part is that a lot of guys didn't know he had a lot of influence in striking. And part of the reason that he got a lot of notoriety, even though prior to that he was doing a lot, was that he was actually probably the defining coach in the first guy to beat Fedor Emelianenko. And that was with Fabricio Verdum. And they set up the triangle based on, knowing which hand he would punch with to step in on the stand-up, knowing which hand they would fall to the floor with, knowing which hand that he was going to step up with to throw the punch. And if you go back and you watch the video, it's interesting because Fabricio doesn't even really get hit. He puts his hand in the way and the hand gets hit, and it looks like he falls down from a KO shot, and then he gets jumped on and the triangle just shoots up like instantaneously. And I remember watching that when I was out there at Worlds, watching them drill it against the wall for like an hour while I was just cutting weight. And I was like, I remember thinking, I was like, that'd be crazy if he pulled that thing off like right there in front of you. And then all of a sudden he does it in Strike Force. And you're like, whoa, like who could have ever expected that, that somebody would take out Fedor at that time?
Right.
Because, Fedor was top tier. And so like seeing that, I was like probably even more excited, more influenced just by watching that, to start strategizing and thinking outside of the box, because I don't necessarily, from that point on, didn't consider myself strong in any one area, except that we could out-strategize and find ways to win. Because that was something also that I experienced early on, is as a big kid, we didn't have kids divisions back then. I ended up competing in adult divisions early on, and I was such a big kid that I ended up having to compete around 160 and 170. And most of these guys were coming from like the fitness realm at the time, because that's when you started to see all these guys like, like Cutler and all these guys come out on these magazines and stuff.
Yeah.
And so everybody was jacked. The only thing I could do was play strategies just to see if I could win on the scorecard, and then, maybe use that to influence the match in some way that I could take some chance and catch a submission. And that's what happened. I would tire the guys out for like 5 to 6 minutes. Once I was up on scorecard from a sweep, okay, then I go for the submission, and that's how I win the match. And so I kind of took that with me into it, and started thinking about strategies and things like that. And I guess that kind of led to me coaching a little bit. So I started coaching around purple belt too. That was before, all the people that were saying like, oh, you can't coach at purple, you can't coach at brown. I was like, I don't believe that. Everybody can learn something from anybody.
Right.
I don't believe in that whole like, oh, you must have a black belt to teach or anything like that. And it was interesting because I got to meet a lot of people that were really, really good like that too, taking little bits from guys like here and there. I may have been doing this longer, but they were good in one area a lot longer than I was. So I would take like bits and pieces from that all the time. And it was really cool to see some of those, like, you know, like an Eddie Cummings or something. I had a lot of exchanges with Eddie Cummings for a while before he kind of went and started doing what he's doing. I'm not sure what he's doing now, but
I think he's just teaching.
Is he teaching? Yeah, he was, I had a lot of back and forths with him through email and message and stuff like that on like early Instagram and stuff, talking to him about, you know, positions and thought process and what he thought about this position. And it was cool to see his logic and thought process change as time went on to develop other skills and things like that. But I guess not necessarily that I had more experience than him or anything like that. It's just the time frame I was doing it in. He condensed all that down into like a smaller amount of time just because of how intense he was training. So like if you looked at it on paper, you're like, oh, I've been doing this longer than you. It's like, no, you haven't. He's got that one area, that niche that he was really good in. He spent all that time and developed all that time and process into it, you know, and that's why I think it was really cool to learn from that. But it also kind of, it brings that stigma out in people that like, oh, the belts, you know, sometimes don't really mean all that much. It's like, I do think they mean a little bit, but not necessarily in the way that people think that they should matter. Right. I think they matter a lot different, especially from like a business standpoint. And that's part of the influence of why we decided to start doing this too, is just because we had a lot of people that were coming to us wanting to learn a lot of this stuff from all the people that we were taking from. And that was right around maybe 2011. We opened up our own school and everybody started coming in to try and get all this stuff from us. I worked with several people from like different areas, several fighters, because I was still training early MMA at that time. I was actually doing a lot of stuff not on record, but I probably had maybe 15 or 20 exchanges in the cage already at that point, probably leaving high school. You know, I would take on challenge matches and things like that. And guys that would just come in like off the street, or guys that would say like, oh, they've had a little bit of practice wrestling at like NCAA level or something like that. And they would come in and they would want to fight. Well, beat this 16-year-old kid and, you know, we'll see where you stand. And that was kind of the idea that they started doing at one of the other gyms I was at anyway. And so I would take on these guys and get the experience like that. And that's also how I guess the influence of like principles and concepts came into play, was because I started thinking, if it doesn't work in the cage, why should I probably teach it, number one? But also I'm almost like making a detriment to people, like, just because if I teach you something that's not going to work in the combative realm, why bother teaching it? I'm just going to get you hurt. You know, like if I'm teaching you for what you would consider self-defense, I'm not going to show you how to do a berimbolo to take a guy's back. And, you know, you're not going to do that on some concrete in the street. That's going to get your head knocked in. Right. But there is some merit to it when you start to look at it, I guess, mechanically and like conceptually from other standpoints. So, you know, in my own practice, I play with that. But when it comes to teaching, I generally teach things that are going to work through like universally. Right. Because like I said, I feel like that's a standard we need to uphold as like instructors. I've always been taught that. That's, you know, what Professor Octavio taught us. That's what my dad taught me like years on. You have a responsibility to these people to make sure that they get the information that they need, and make sure that that information is not subpar, and it's not something that's going to be theory. It's got to be something tried and true. Right. So that was kind of like the early idea of how we would judge things when we taught them. And then of course we have our lesson plans and stuff like that we would go over. I kept books and books and books and that stuff. And, you know, till this day, we still have books and books of that stuff. I still have files and stuff like that on my phone, iPad, laptops, like all kinds of stuff that we still have. I could tell you, as well as my dad could probably tell you, what we taught back in 2008 on this particular day. Dang. Just because it's like all like noted in there. And then in addition to that, it was very interesting because I started fighting professional, or I fought one amateur MMA fight, I think right after, not too long after we opened. I got like my brown belt for about 2 years, competed in jiu-jitsu a little bit more, but I kind of started to get a little bit sidetracked just because I still like doing stand-up, but I also wasn't all that into like some of the politics that was going on. And I really didn't want to spend $2,000 at that time to go out to like LA and go compete at like a Pans just to get screwed over. So I just decided, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do MMA. So I did my first sanctioned MMA bout at AMI, and that was the only amateur bout I got. I didn't get to compete anymore after that because nobody would take the fights. And I fought under the early LFA, which I think was just Legacy at the time. And I think I got an arm bar in the first round. I forget how long it took. I think the match might be on YouTube somewhere, but yeah, there was that. I took about a year off after that from MMA, and then decided to get back into competition jiu-jitsu. Ended up at that match, I think I was 170, and then ended up cutting weight to like 145, I think, or 155, something like that, to compete at the black belt division for, I think, the early Fight to Win. It was probably one of the earliest Fight to Wins before they even started doing like their podium shows. And I got the title for that one. That was a tough division. I actually cut so much weight that day that I started getting dry mouth, like in the middle of the second round of the matches.
Okay.
And I stopped sweating. I was like, oh man, something serious is going on here. And I was like, okay, that also led me into more, I guess, experimentation and study of like eating habits and like, things like that. I was already doing that like early on, but it wasn't quite to the level that it is now, where like every little thing is like matters that you do, but yeah, that was my first kind of foray into it. And that was a crazy one too, because at that time I went completely vegan and completely liquid.
Oh, dang.
I threw all kinds of greens and anything like that, as far as greens are concerned, into a blender, liquefied it. And then that was my meal.
Damn.
Like for about 6 to 8 weeks, I did that just to make the weight, and just water on top of that. And, going to training places. I was running to Dallas to go train and then come back down here to go train. And then I'd run to Dallas to go train and come back down here to go train.
Damn.
For about, maybe 6 to 8 weeks. It was pretty intense, but I like process a lot of the time. I like doing things a lot like that. So it was fun to do that. And then, probably one of the more influential things that I had too around that time, a little bit before that, I think right before I turned brown, was I went with a buddy, black belt Hernan Chavez. I'm not sure if you know.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so he's a black belt under Pablo Popovich, actually. Okay. And that was at the time when Pablo was getting ready for Barcelona, I think in 2009, to get ready to compete in ADCC. And we went down there for the entire training camp. And that was another level of competition that was interesting to watch, but it was also, I guess, kind of introspective. I had a lot of time to myself to sit there and think about, what am I going to do? Because I was watching this guy. We would come into a room like this, and in a room like this guy had 5 photos, just photos, like big, like canvas-sized printouts on the wall of his losses, specifically to Marcelo Garcia.
Dang.
Just 5 of them with the dates under them and what he lost to.
Damn it.
And I was like, I mean, they were good matches. I remember seeing it and I was like, why do you have this up here? Like, this seems like it would be depressing, And then come to find out, he was so obsessed with it that he was just like, he was training like 3 times a day. He was doing like workouts like 2 or 3 times, post session, not fresh during the workout. Like he would work out after the session was over. And meals were dialed in to like a T. He had his own diet plan, all the stuff that he was doing. Like everything took a back seat to just getting ready for this match. And then, I remember waiting back here in Texas, waiting for like any type of notification, call, text, or anything like that, just to figure out how it had gone, just because, they were on a different time frame. At the time, nobody was live streaming the events. It was just wait till it comes out on Bushido videos.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, like what's happened? Some of you guys fill me in. I was trying to text everybody to figure out, and they're like, oh, he won.
No,
I was like, oh, he won. I was like, yeah. I was like, it felt really good. And I wasn't a coach, but I was a training partner, and I guess you could consider it a teammate at that time for those guys. So I was like, that kind of gave me a little bit more push into the coaching and team territory that I wanted to develop. That was a really big one as far as like influencing me to do that stuff, just because I bring it back here and I wanted to do that with a lot of guys here.
Yeah.
And we started doing, at the time, it really wasn't all that well received. But me and Hanad started doing the first first and probably the biggest to date that I can remember, citywide open mats. That's actually where the idea came from. Was me and him did like 2 or 3 of them. And I remember a lot of people wouldn't directly say it to my face, but I know a lot of people weren't happy with it because they thought I was trying to poach students, or they thought, Henan was trying to start up a school under their noses or something. It's like, no, we just wanted people to come in and come train and just experience everything.
Yeah.
And we had everybody there. Like, I think at the first one, we had close to 300 people there. And
Dang.
there was so much, I guess, limited space that we had to do rounds in group 1, group 2, group 3. Group 1, it's your round. Group 2, it's your round. Group
Dang.
3, it's your round. Group 1, you're back on. Group 2, you're back on. Group 3. And it was so hot in that room that, like, it was just a fog in there. Everybody was just sweating. We had all the doors open. Everything was like good to go, but there's just so many people. The second one, same thing, like 200, 300 people. Again, group 1, back on. Group 2, back on. And that's how we train. And then, of course, people started kind of saying stuff about it. And we were like, you know what? There's just too much hassle to deal with. We had coaches calling us and people texting us and saying things like, you shouldn't be doing this. What are you guys doing this? I don't know if I could send my guy here because he was saying that, that you guys are trying to do this and this. Is like, none of that was true. It was just, hey, man, we just wanted people to come out and come train.
Yeah.
And then we set up our own groups. We started doing our own teams. And that's, I guess, probably more so how he started doing his own school. But then that's also how we started getting into our groups too, is we just said, hey, so many people were interested in it. They always ask questions when we were there. Hey, here's the school, come ask questions. That was it. And just a genuine love for it. Not necessarily that we wanted to poach anybody. We didn't want to. I still like some of these guys, still see some of them day to day that were there. Local competitions, MMA fights, I still see them all the time. Still say hi and stuff like that when I can. When we're not busy, because MMA and coaching is taking over a lot of time. But yeah, that's probably up till now. That's the majority of what's been going on.
Yeah. Well, dude, there's a lot to unpack there. You said Jeet Kune Do. I just want to make sure I'm right, but that was Bruce Lee's lineage, right? The martial art that he kind of came up with, and it was like just the idea of taking pieces from everything and combining it all together.
Yeah, it was not to talk bad about it or anything like that. I think it's how you present things, I guess, that matters. Everybody in jiu-jitsu, I don't think, was ready for that scientific approach at the time, because really what it was is a Socratic method, and you have that now with the guys that watch guys like Danaher or anything like that. Like, that's basically what he did. He took a scientific method and stuck it in jiu-jitsu. We had that years ago early on, because that's basically what the principles and concepts, because it was Jeet Kune Do concepts. It wasn't just the Jeet Kune Do originally. That's basically what they told us. Hey, here's the things that you need to look for, to abide by, about whether or not something's going to look or work properly. If it doesn't, discard it. It may come back later on. You may look into it in a deeper viewpoint. But for right now, these are the things that are going to put you on the right path to discovering what you need to discover for that time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I brought it up to one of my students the other day about just like, and generally you don't want to meet resistance with resistance. You want to go with it. And I just brought it up with the Bruce Lee thing. And one of my 15-year-olds, he was like, Bruce Lee, wasn't he fake? Like, Bruce Lee, I didn't think he was a real martial artist. And I couldn't even explain it to him. Like, no, man.
They didn't grow up with that, right?
Yeah. It's like Bruce Lee, yes, he was an actor, but it's the reason he got to that level is because he was a master. And it's like, he was small, but the concepts that he put out there definitely had a lot of value. And it's just funny. It's like lost onto the newer generation these days.
Man.
They're like, wasn't he a fake? Like, no, he wasn't. And then you were talking about using the sticks to like close the distance and get someone down. So it's like even in like weapon sparring, you saw like grappling, and then in the boxing, grappling as well, right? Man, it cracks me up. I
still use it too. I still use it a lot. I use a lot of grappling when I box with the guys. I try to hug them up and like keep them in phone booth and arm drag and Russian tie up and things like that. I use all that in there.
Yeah, when I did Muay Thai for a while, I'm getting back into striking now. I kind of took, after my concussion that stopped me doing MMA, I just like doubled down on grappling. And so it's been a long time since I was doing striking, but now I've been getting back into it. And one of my huge successes when I was training Muay Thai was the clinch. It's like, yeah, the striking rounds, you know, maybe I wouldn't do so. Well, I did like a lot of boxing from the Marine Corps. So my hands are really good, but that kicking good distance would always mess me up. But the second we would do clinch rounds, I would just like beat up everybody. I would use the underhook and I'd turn them and push their face away.
Yeah.
So then I just have the angle and I would just beat people up with that, just with the grappling. And it always cracked me up is like how much grappling was used in striking. And the same thing in boxing.
Yeah.
If someone gets close to me, I just tie them up, shove them off, and hit them on the way out. And it's just like these tiny little concepts that you can pull from other martial arts that helps out a lot. But yeah, I've been boxing lately, trying to get back into it. And it's we were doing like 1 foot in the tire and doing like
Those are tough.
yeah, man. And yeah, just doing like what do you call it? Like inside, learning to fight on the inside.
Yeah.
And yeah.
What do you think now? I guess, do you think it's easier or do you think it's harder now that you have, I guess, a better insight and perspective on the movements and stuff like that with your grappling? Or I guess also maybe a little bit of like, how confident are you in the striking, knowing that you have that grappling to fall back on?
Yeah, man.
Do you feel like that plays a role in it?
Oh, for sure.
I thought it did a lot.
Yeah.
Personally.
I mean, my buddy, I was sparring, doing MMA rounds with my buddy, and he was like, it's a nightmare. He's like, we go to the ground, it's over.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know, it's a super strength. Like now, so I truly feel like my grappling is on another level. If I step on the cage with somebody, they're not going to want to go to the ground with me. And so that in of itself is like super, it's like, man, if I could just funnel all the chaos into the one thing that I want, it's going to be over, you know, like Damian Ma style. Yeah. But it's also like a weakness in of itself, because the second I get frustrated in like the MMA rounds, I just go for the takedown, you know? And so it's like, man, I got to force myself to do the kickboxing rounds, the boxing rounds. But like the other day I went to sparring. It's like an open mat sparring at the Empire. And yeah, we did. We started out with kickboxing rounds, and one of the white belts just beat the brakes off me. I was like, dude, I need to warm up. And he's like, well, my style's pressure. And I was like, yeah. Okay. And he literally chased me around the mats, just like throwing bombs. And I was like, all right, well, the next round's going to be MMA. So as soon as we did the MMA, just fucking put his big ass on the mats. But it's funny, like, I noticed that my mind knows what to do. Like my mind knows
it's like
where I'm supposed to be. I just got to get my body to like be ingrained with it, like kind of bring them together. You know, it's just like anything. When you know something, it's like, you know, when you get a high level of jiu-jitsu, even if there's a move that you haven't seen before, you kind of understand it. You're like, I just got to make the mind-body connection. So experiencing that with boxing is like, it's like the process. It's like, I know what to do. My body's not doing it, but just over time, it'll start to sync up.
Yeah. Like we try to preach that to a lot of our guys too. Actually, one of the things that we have here is some of the guys don't like it, but later on they see the logic for it, is that if you're going to get a black belt under us, it doesn't matter whether you're going to do it no-gi or gi. You have to have some striking before you get there. Like at least a year's practice. Because number one, I mean, you get into something, you're going to need to know how to close the gap.
Yep.
You know, truthfully, you do. Like it's a lot different experiencing hard striking, like strikes thrown with like some bad intentions, than it is necessarily just get in there and flow spar, you know, just to get it to the floor. And then on top of that, it's like, you don't realize like how much of a superpower you have when you have that grappling to fall back on it in your back pocket, you know, just because then you start to realize, oh, the more you do it, you're like, the striking doesn't have to be as hard as I am thinking it is, just because it's combat. Still principles and concepts apply throughout.
Right.
So you start thinking like, oh, there's a delayed timing here. There's like a before timing. There's like a during timing. There's like an after timing of when to go after the guy. There's proper feeling here. There's an angle here, just like you would in jiu-jitsu. There's a time to pass. There's a time to footlock. There's a time to guillotine. There's a time to escape. There's a time to defend. There's all these very similar just things that happen almost identically. Even if you were to take both people standing up and flip them on their back and put them on the ground, the same things would happen. Like just the same timings, all the same stuff would look like that. And I try to get that across to some of the guys too, especially the guys going into the cage, you know, like you have the video playing, they can't see it on camera, but I tell the guys, you need to think in 3D, not just thinking that you're always going to be on your back if you're going to grapple. What happens if it goes to the wall?
Mhm.
Oh man, I can't get this guy off me. His head's driving to my waist and, he's got my arm trapped. Well, how'd you get out of it on the ground? Oh, well, I push against his head here. I scoot my hip out to the side. Well, why don't you do that there? I never thought of that. Yeah. I was like, that's the ground, man. That's not the floor. The wall is the ground.
Right.
Oh, well, what if he takes me down? Well, you're back where you wanted to be, aren't you?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, I guess I shouldn't stress about that. I was like, yeah, if he's not punching you, there's no reason to sit there and fear it,
Right.
if you can control the punches. So that's kind of the thoughts that we try to get across to some of them. Granted, the striking guys, they take it with a grain of salt just because they still want to do their stand-up. They still want to look for their KO shots and all that stuff because you want the highlight reels. But I think it'll come easier personally, like what we talked about a second ago about the feeling confident in your striking skills if the ground is always feared. Because when I was fighting MMA a lot, I would try to get the guys to go after takedowns on me. I wanted them to do it because I could take a shot and I was okay with that. I had enough experience boxing, karate, and like the Muay Thai wise that I could get in there and exchange with them just enough to create a problem where they'd want to shoot.
Yep.
And when they would do it, I was like, oh, okay, I can relax now. I'm here.
Yeah.
And then they'd start to feel that relaxation. Like, oh, nope, right back up to the field. It's like, okay, we'll continue this again. Hit you, kick you, elbow you. Like just continuously just onslaught, pressure, angles, and then force you to go again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's only a couple of times I've actually forcefully shot in to get the takedown. And it's not necessarily that I wanted to just get the takedown. It's like kind of like I was doing it just to kind of tire them out a little bit. So that if they did go back up to the feet, I could outstrike them a lot easier and then force them to go for a bad shot and go for the submission of whatever it was.
Yeah.
Because I was always pretty confident in my escapes. I feel like I still am. Submission opportunities, I don't try to stop them necessarily from doing any particular thing sometimes. I try to funnel them into getting one area that I want them to be in and then taking what they give me from there. That's a huge part, I think, of development for a lot of the grappling too, when it comes into using it for like different purposes, is just trying to get the idea of you don't have to make everything hard. Like I remember one time I was told by somebody that the direct translation of jiu-jitsu is soft touch fighting. So does that mean it has to be me lightly putting my hands? No, that can be my body weight and pressure is there, but I can use my hands freely. Does that mean that he's got to put pressure on me for me to be able to do something? Not necessarily. If I angle my body out in a way that, I don't have to feel that pressure, the similar idea is soft touch fighting. Sometimes they shouldn't know you're there. The best setup happens when you can't see it. And, a lot of times that comes from relaxation, practice, and all that stuff that you're doing in there. But strategy too, that plays a role into it, I think, anyway.
No, 100%. Yeah, you're talking about doing the weapon sparring. One, I think it's really cool. You were saying how as a kid you experienced all these things and you didn't even know like how unique it was. Just listening to your story, that's like super unique. I mean, you were essentially growing up with like you essentially witness things that most people will never witness, right? It's like, I would say that no one's really going back and watching pride fights or anything like that. Unless you're like a Danaher, you're not sitting around studying old footage or anything like that. And then you as a kid, right? So you're like downloading information that not even the adults can pick up on because you still got a young mind, a beginner's mind. So I thought that was really cool.
Some of that stuff was a lot crazier too, just because one of the other realms that we used to touch on a lot that's still very neglected is what happens if there's like an edged weapon in a situation. We still do a lot of that. I remember thinking early on that I probably shouldn't have been taking in this information at 9 years old, but how to use a knife in grappling settings.
Dang.
And I still carry a lot of that with me. It influences a lot of the handwork and the grip fighting that I do, just because you grab a particular way, it kind of nullifies some movements that you can get with the blade. You can use the weapon against them, almost like you would use, say, like a gift wrap or something like that to put the arm back into the body. There's ways to do that with the weapon that kind of just stop every other situation, just because, I mean, it's a weapon, it's an edge weapon. Why are you going to sit there and go at the point? You have to address it first. So there was a lot of influence on that, but it was pretty adult level content for a kid that age. But I took a lot of it in, and luckily I was I had enough mature people around me to say like, hey, don't go messing with this stuff. You know, this is practice, right?
Right. Yeah. And I was a Marine for 7 years, and we would do a lot of that stuff, right? We'd train with blades, weapons of opportunity, which are like batons to simulate something that you pick up off the ground, or a piece of rebar or something like that, or a baton. We had bayonets, and we would do a lot of weapons free sparring. And the grappling was always a huge piece of that.
Yeah, I still do some of that with our guys, actually.
Awesome.
Yeah, I do that with some of our guys. I'll take a weapon like a training knife. They don't know what's going to happen. The round starts, they got 7 minutes, and I just slide it right in between the both of them. They're like, they grab it, and everybody starts going to work. It's funny to do some of that stuff sometimes with them.
And
it brings a different level and dimension to it too, you know.
For sure. You know, a lot of it is mindset. You know, it's not necessarily, am I trying to teach you a specific technique? It's just the mindset, because jiu-jitsu, you can get lazy, you know. You can be like, oh, I like being on my back. But if someone has a blade, you don't want to be on your back. You know, you want to get on top as soon as possible. You know, just like, again, just the mindset. But I was really good at weapons free. I was just good at the martial arts in general in the Marine Corps, just because I had early exposure to it. And so I would win. I want to say someone could bring me back in time and be like, no, you lost this match. But I was pretty sure I never lost a match as far as like going against other students in the courses and things like that. And I only lost one match, and it was going against one of the instructors going to one of the courses that we were at. It's like a 7-week course where they just beat your ass every day. And they're teaching you how to teach martial arts. And the way they teach you is just by kicking your ass. And man, he just like beat me up with violence. Like we have helmets on, flak jackets, and then you get to pick your weapon, and then you're coming like around a corner, and so you're meeting an unknown opponent with an unknown weapon, and you just got to figure it out. Yeah, that's rough. I had a pretty good strategy.
You got your heart rate going for sure. Huh?
Oh yeah. And this was like one of the final events too. So we're like no food, sleep deprived, everything, right? That sucks. And one of the instructors was like a current, not a UFC fighter, but fighting for one of the local promotions, like professional. And anyway, I had a pretty good strategy. I had 2 knives, and the first one I would just like throw, and then just like come in, and I would just tie up with you and get you in the back. You know, so I was like guaranteed to get a killing blow. And man, I ran up to him with that same move, and he literally just double rats my hands and started headbutting me with just like pure, like we had helmets on, but not like nice helmets. Like these things are like rattling all over your head. So yeah, I went to go to stab him. He just rapped me, and just boom, 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 until I just like collapsed. And it was just like eye-opening of just like that concept of violence. Yeah. You know, he just literally took it to a level that I just wasn't ready for. And we teach that to the Marines. You know, it's when in doubt, increase the intensity. Yeah. If you feel like you don't know the technique, or you don't know what's happening, you push it to the maximum as quickly as you can, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I teach some of that too in the self-defense side of it for the Nogi. It's also why we don't allow kids a lot of times into the class. They have their own separate class that they do for some Nogi stuff, but you know, one of the things that we used to do early on was we actually trained headbutts, knees, and elbows in our grappling, including bites. Oh, snap. And we couldn't find equipment that would hold up to it enough other than a motorcycle helmet.
Oh, dang.
So we started using motorcycle helmets for the longest period of time, and then eventually the motorcycle helmets started breaking, because we'd put a headbutt straight forward, you know, top where you're supposed to go to, and it would just go right through the fiberglass shield, or it would crack the side of the head. And we're like, well, there's another one. We need to go buy another one next week.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, we started doing that a lot, like back in the day. And we still do some of it now, but there's smarter ways to train it. And it's a little bit, I think, scary to some people just to experience that, like, hey, there is another dimension to this other than just what you're thinking you see out here or what you see in a cage. Like there's the training for gym, because you like to do it. There's the sport aspect. There's the MMA realm, and then there's the self-defense, and then there's the, you know, hey, this is life or death situation. You know, and a lot of people really aren't ready for that. A lot of times we end up having those in closed sessions just because it's so intense that, you know, some people end up breaking down if they haven't had experience with it before. I've seen, you know, grown men suddenly have like a coming to moment, like, oh man, I don't know if I can continue doing this. Like, you know, they're just like, this is another level of like, not insanity, but just violence that you're just not ready for, you know?
Right.
Like, you really think about getting taught biting in particular areas to get the maximum result, or you really think about how you would stick your head through somebody, or how a bottle's going to break if you use it, you know, a particular brand, like even that to that level, like, you know, a Heineken bottle might break easier than a Corona bottle. That's the level, like we're talking about breaking these things down. It's like people are like, oh, you don't really, you know, register in your head that people think like that, but it's like, it's true.
Yeah.
It's scary, especially now, just because I think people are a little more exposed to it now, but it's still just as shocking, just because you see all this stuff with like, you know, like the violence that's going on, I guess, across the border, or like you see some of these other things that you're starting to see kind of pop up here in the States a little bit. Some of these situations where like just simply a fall is enough to do it, but a fall in the right way, done by the right person, that's enough to end somebody, you know? So I think that's really important, that even when you're training, even if it doesn't mean that you're necessarily training grappling, you always have that in the back of your head, that there's still some self-defense aspect to it. It's not just a sport. You know, I think that's really, really important. It brings a realism to it. And even though it does kind of put a damper sometimes on some of the practice, just because you're like, oh, this is really rough. This is really chaotic. This is very serious. You do need it sometimes. You know, it does influence a lot of the stuff you choose to do in the exchanges as well.
Yeah.
But that's our thoughts on it most of the time. I try not to go there too much, just because a lot of people aren't, you know, like I said, they're not that ready for that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's still fun to bring them into it, and sometimes let them experience it just a little bit, just so they can get a taste of another dimension.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a student who's she's a female, really into guns, and her whole thing is like self-defense and being able to take care of herself. So she's always asking me, you know, is this a self-defense move? I'm gonna be able to do this against a bigger, stronger opponent. So it's always fun to kind of like circle back to that idea, you know, because like generally when you teach jiu-jitsu, you kind of like giving them options for an opponent their size and their weight, right? But then it's she's always having me circle back to like, okay, well, what if they're bigger? What if it's a guy and he's way stronger than me? And so
it makes you think outside the box too.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, it's like, for her, you know, she's a smaller woman, you know, so she wants to make sure that, you know, if she is in a confrontation against someone bigger and stronger, like what are her options, you know? And you know, just like anything, it's like the grappling plays such a huge aspect, but it's just one small piece. We're talking about like the striking.
I made my wife start training stand up just because of that same idea. Like, I was like, hey, you got to experience this. Like, there's ways to do this. There's distances to hold. There's things you're going to do in practice that you're not going to do in a real situation.
Right. And just that idea of like being able to fight back changes everything. Just being able to fight back, right? Like,
it's the way you carry yourself. Like,
oh yeah. She's a big proponent of that too. She said that she'll like look people in the eyes and say like, hey, is there anything I can help you with? If they're like, you know, following her around or anything, just like, again, that, what do you call it? Situational awareness, right? So she's big on that. And then just like, you know, the idea of that most people who take advantage of weaker people, they want the one who's going to do nothing, the one who's going to like try to placate them with words. And it's like, if you simply just fight back, you're going to change everything. Most people, they don't want to fight you.
Yeah, just a tone of voice could mean a lot.
Right. But that striking, it's like, man, jiu-jitsu can be, you know, like you said, like a superpower, right? Where it's like, I'm going to funnel this into where I want it, and I'll control the situation from there. But if you don't have that striking, if you don't have the comfortability of like closing that distance, then you're still terrified, because you're like, man, how am I can't get to this guy. You know, like there's nothing worse than having a superpower than not being able to use it, because the dude's fighting you at a distance and keeping you away with a jab. Like that would suck. So yeah, just tying it all together. I really like the idea of, you know, that you've had experience from all these different realms, because that was like a huge piece of the Marine Corps too, is like,
I've seen actually some of the Marine Corps' their actual information that they teach to you guys. I have my hands on some of that. I like to keep a lot of logs and things like that people have. so we have some of the blueprints and I guess schematics, if you want to say that, for what they were trying to teach in certain like weeks throughout the training periods for some of those guys. It's interesting to see because it gives you a good idea too of how you would run a training camp for something very short, because we have been asked to do that before. You know, like I think everybody gets the impression that we teach just the sport aspect of the mixed martial arts, but there's several times that we've been asked to teach specifically self-defense situations. I know of one instance actually with my father where he was actually several occasions in which some guys were in the right as far as self-defense, but when they went to court, the court let them, I guess, off with a lenient sentence, but they still had to go do time. So we had to do crash courses with these guys on, you know, basically situational awareness and real true self-defense for what you'd go into if you were going into a prison. And it would be like a crash course over like 72 hours, or basically just in a room similar to like a training environment, or the whole thing is just from, you know, 12 to 12, all content, like to that level, you know. And it's really important too, because one of the things that's always icked me about some of that stuff whenever you see some of the self-defense stuff portrayed out there, especially whenever it's marketed towards women, is that it's like, man, you're not going to teach a woman how 8 years of jiu-jitsu experience and a double leg takedown to like a back take, or, you know, how some guard sweep is used to get to like some specific arm bar or something like that. You're not going to teach them what took you 8 years to develop in a matter of like an hour.
Right.
It's not going to work. As many times as you want to say you're going to put a price tag on it and say that I'm the instructor that's responsible for this, and this, and here's all my accolades, it's not going to work. Right. You're better off teaching them a situational awareness or just simple things with, I guess, what we call equalizers or weapons, like weapons of opportunity that are going to, you know, help out in the situation.
Yep.
Because that, like it's like you said, like the girl that you were talking about, she's got the right mindset, man, because it's all about where you're at. You know, a lot of people don't do that nowadays just because everybody's stuck on their phone.
Staring down at the phone, walking around, staring at the phone, for sure. Yeah,
it drives me nuts. I even get after our daughter just because she's always got her earbuds in or something like that. And like there was an instance that happened not too long ago. We were at a HEB and we were doing shopping. And these guys who were speaking, I think it might have been Ukrainian dialect. And the only reason I know is just because I had been following some like pages that do like, I guess, crash course teaching for the stuff that's going on over there. And they kept looking at us. She's on her little like watch, you know, texting people, and she's got her earbuds in. My wife was I think looking at putting stuff on the belt. And as she's doing that, I'm watching these guys and they keep looking at us and they're saying things. And then I noticed that one of the words that they were saying was, you know, reference towards us. And I was like, all right, either something's about to go down because they're watching her with those like those little earbuds in that watch, because it was a brand new Apple Watch, like one of the first ones that had just come out with like all the like newer stuff on it. And then they're watching me and they're watching her. And I was like, they either caught a view of us coming in, they caught a view of us walking around, or they noticed that she's not paying attention and she's not paying attention. A couple of minutes go by and we get everything on there and they stop us and go, oh, you train, right? I was like, oh. Then I realized, I was like, oh yeah, they were looking at my ears the entire time. But the fact that we saw it, I was like, I kind of started posturing up already and just started looking at them and making sure that they knew I was watching them. And But yeah, just because it kind of was like one of those moments where either something's going to go down or, you know, luckily nothing did. And it was just kind of like the least amount of things that could happen. But it was one of those situations, like awareness, you know.
Yeah, you want to be a hard target.
Yeah.
Hard to kill, you know, just like, they teach us in the Marine Corps, you know, you want to take different routes to where you're going. You don't want to take the same route every time. Just like these little things that'll make someone less likely to choose you. They choose the people that are, what's the word? It's complacent.
Yes.
They want the complacent people, right? So, you know, the Marine Corps' whole thing is the
complacency kills.
Complacency kills. So, you know, they would never let us be complacent. But you're talking about, so we were talking about, just the situational awareness and how to apply different things, or just like the self-defense aspect, closing the distance, utilizing striking. And you're saying how you saw some of the Marine Corps stuff. Man, so many people would talk smack about like the curriculum the Marine Corps would use. You know,
No,
it's
they
like,
do a
oh,
good job.
yeah, you know,
They do a good job of getting these guys right. Honestly, they probably do a good enough job that if a random guy from the Marine Corps walked in here, he'd probably be close to maybe a 4-stripe white belt
yeah,
in the gi, and probably like maybe a year's worth experience in MMA if you were to throw him in the ring.
yeah,
They
man.
do that. They do a really good job of doing that, just because I don't think a lot of people try to sit there and say like, oh, they brainwashed you guys and believe in your hard asses. Like, no, they gave them skills. That's what made them feel like they were hard asses.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You know, they gave you guys decent enough skills that you know you can handle yourself in the majority of street fights if it were to go down.
Yeah.
And that's true. Most of those guys can. You know, it's the choice to drink alcohol or do something else after that gets you into trouble or whatever it is. Like anybody, you know, anybody gets some courage juice in them, they think they can fight.
Right.
But do you have the skills?
Right.
You know, the Marine guys, they get that. They get a lot of that.
Yeah. Like one of the first things I would lead, you know, because I've been in charge of teaching Marines' wives, kids, all kinds of stuff. And just like you said, I would tell them, there's no technique I'm going to be able to show you. Unless you're going to leave here and practice this thing all the time, it's not going to happen. But what I can teach you is like basic concepts, right? Like if someone is trying to kill me, I must take it to a faster level. Like if someone's choking me, I've got to immediately put you in more danger than I'm in. So if you're choking me, I probably got like 60 seconds. So what can I do? I can jam my thumb into your eyeball. Yeah. Right? Now that you're gonna stop choking me. Or I'm gonna cup my hands and I'm gonna slap you in the ears as hard as I can, as many times as I can. Right? Just these ideas. It's like that's the best thing that I can give you in this short amount of time. But in for the Marines, right? So, you know, just
and
like
they teach you guys to keep a cool head too, because y'all practice that stuff on each other. And they teach you guys to keep a cool head while it's happening so you can think under pressure. Because we do a lot of that in competition classes too. Is I'll tell the guys a lot of times like that some of them that first come to competition class don't necessarily like it. But I tell them was like, hey, if the guy falls on you the wrong way or your arm gets hyperextended, your leg gets, you know, torqued or something like that, and, you know, an injury happens, that's not their fault. That's your fault for not being ready for it. You should have been escalating to the next level already. You should have been trying to make the escape. If you know they're going to club you in the back of the head, don't get mad about it. You know, they clubbed you already. Okay, what's the big deal? You should have been ready for it. Because a lot of that stuff happens in competition. I mean, you know yourself, some of these guys, they'll drop elbows on you. They'll headbutt you. They'll pick you up and slam you to the floor. They'll try to drive you off the mats into like the barricades or, you know, whatever else is around, right? And if you're ready for that stuff, because you've already been to like another level with it, it doesn't affect you. You can think clearly, you know, in almost like a situational awareness for competition. Yep. And a lot of guys really aren't ready for that. They take offense to it, you know, even now, like people still take offense to it that have been doing it for years. You slap me in the face, you headbutt me, I really don't care. Like I've been punched, I've been bitten. I had a guy try to fish hook me and he stuck his finger up my nose one time and just pulled my nostril back, and, you know, but it's, you know, all is fair in combat as far as I'm considered.
I was just at the ADCC Austin, and I was coaching one of the blue belts, and it was a pretty close match. I want to say that the other guy was kind of getting better of the initiations on the wrestling, but then our guy would get the reversal. And they had a couple exchanges back and forth, and our guy gets on top, and this dude just straight up puts his foot on him and like kicks him, you know. And that's legal, but maybe there's a little bit of space, so it was like more of a kick instead of like a push. And just for a moment, our guy is like this, and that dude literally just hops back up and tackles him back to the ground. And you know, I told him after, I was like, buddy, you lost focus for a second because he kicked you. And he's like, yeah, but I don't like that. And I was like, it doesn't matter, dude. You got to stay focused. If you just would have, because the dude was actually on the ground, right? He already gotten they were kind of like off the edge of the mat, but in ADCC, they don't care. And until you're stopped, you keep going. And this dude got off the mat and he literally just put his foot on the dude's chest and like kicked him. And just for a split moment, he was like, man, what's going on with this?
Yeah,
and
he did it for that purpose.
The ref didn't stop it. And as soon as he like did this, the dude just jumped back up and tackled him back, and he wasn't able to recover from that. And it's like, you know, just that same idea is like, you're going to get kicked. You know, you don't, I've been in that position before too, where someone was like, oh, you need me. And then the ref just been like, it's a combat sport, dude. Yeah. You know? So it's like, I try to make sure I'm never the guy that's complaining about something, you know, or I got hit in the head. I'm just like, just take it and we'll deal with the shit later. You know? Oh man.
I don't know how people get into, even regular sports. I don't know how you're going to get into a regular sport and not expect something to happen every now and then. You know, like it's going to happen. If it's sport, people want to win. People do things out of the ordinary to try to win.
Yeah.
You know, I like to read a lot, and if I'm not reading, then I'm probably listening to a book on audio. And I think one of my favorites is this one. It's called The Captain Class. And there's a couple of inserts in there where they talk about the defining characteristics and personalities that are basically what you would consider high level captains, even though it doesn't technically fit the description of what you would think a captaincy would be. Everyone thinks the captain's supposed to be the guy that, you know, is a straight edge, you know, plays by the rules, all this stuff. It's like, but then they give you all these examples of all these people who are playing to the edge of the rules, sometimes stepping over it, but then keeping in mind the fact that every single time they step over that edge or they start to go to that mark, they're still remembering, hey, it's sport. It's not a fight. It's sport. You know, they keep going to that edge. It's the same thing in grappling.
You're talking like a captain, like in charge of a team.
Like in charge of a team. I think there was one of my favorites was I think it was Maria Luis, I think, for volleyball. She was on the Brazilian team against the Cubans in, I think, 88. And they were playing, I think, the finals match. And they talk about how the Cuban team was doing pretty poor for a little while. Or no, there was the Cuban team versus the Brazilians. That's what it was. And the Cubans had struggled throughout the majority of the tournament, even though they were the favorite to win. They struggled throughout the majority of the tournament to the point to where everybody was thinking that they were going to lose everything. The Brazilians were just going to walk through them. And so they started playing more aggressive, but then started hurling insults, which isn't against the rules, but it is kind of playing to the edge of the rules to the point to where they started getting yellow carded. And because they were playing to the edge of the rules and doing this, it caused the other team to start playing more reckless and take more shots and things like that they didn't really need to do because they were winning, and they ended up losing the match because they lost their cool, right? They pretty much went to the point to where it was like, oh, we're going to get them back. They want to be malicious about it. It's like, hey, you forgot it's a sport, you know, like you still have to win by the sport rules, but until you get warned otherwise, you can probably push it a little bit more than what you're expecting. And I think that was one of those good examples about like the captaincy thing, just like that, just because like what you said, you had to remind your student, you know, it's, hey man, it's still a sport, you know, like stuff like that happens. Don't be the guy that complains about it. Be the guy that figures a way around it.
Right.
Yeah.
You said it's called Captain's Fall?
The Captain Class.
The Captain
Class. Yeah. It's a very interesting book. I think I probably reread it like 3 times now.
Dang, it's got to be good then.
Yeah. It's got a lot of good little examples. The beginning's kind of drawn out, but then you see the logic for it just because it deals with a lot of statistics about like numbers and how he made his judgments on who he was going to include in his book for the captaincy and like why there were these particular roles. And a lot of them are people that you don't really expect. They're people that are like kind of leading from the back that you don't hear too much about. They're guys that maybe don't possess the greatest athletic prowess, but they make up for it in their hustle on the floor. You know, everybody thinks like, oh, this guy's like a superior athlete. It's like, no, he just practices a lot more than everybody else.
Yeah.
And because he practices a lot more, he influences the other guys to do so.
Right.
So it's like a direct influence on people. So it's like, you know, you being like a coach and stuff too, telling something like that to that guy all of a sudden probably just opened up a whole new world of possibilities in his brain.
Yeah.
That was just like, oh, if I can take them to this point where they start doing that back to me, I'm winning.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's a big deal with it. A lot of sport is like that, you know. I think that's really important to remember is that you're still in the sport realm.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's really interesting for me to study. I like a lot of sports psychology, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I read a lot too. Especially, I got an Audible account, and I'm like I currently drive an hour to my gym, sometimes an hour 15, depending on traffic. So I'm constantly listening to books. One of my favorites is Joshua Waitzkin, The Art of Learning.
I've seen that. I haven't read it yet, but it's been on the list.
Yeah, it's really good, man, and it just kind of talks about he's a chess master, and then he ends up mastering Tai Chi push hands, which is a grappling art, and he goes over and wins the championship, and I think it's Thailand or wherever that art originates from, and he was just saying how like he had to go through the same things where the country obviously like messed with their team the whole time. You know, like their guys knew exactly when they were competing, and they would just mess with their time. Like, oh, you got like 4 hours till you
I think
compete.
it was China.
Yeah, one of those countries. And he was like, they tell them they have like 4 or 5 hours. They'd all like break out their food, start eating, and be like, oh no, you're up. You know, just like messing with the times, messing with who goes, what side of the bracket they're on. And it's just like one of those things where it's like, if you want to compete on a national level, for sure, whoever is hosting the tournament is going to favor their guys. And that's, you can't complain about it because no one cares. You know, no one's going to care about how, oh, they did this and they did that. It's just like, you either won or you didn't.
No one cares until after the story, like after you do it and you win, nobody cares about it until after that.
Right.
It's like, then they want to know the story of the background of all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But I'll definitely, the captain's class, I'm definitely going to listen to that one. I like those types of books. But yeah, man, we've been talking over an hour. This thing flew by. That goes to say how much we had to talk about, but just wrap things up. You know, this is a motivational podcast. I want my audience to get something out of this. So what would be your advice as a lifelong martial artist? What would be your advice for, I want to say you're one of the biggest competitors in Houston. So maybe what would be your advice to someone looking to make that transition from a hobbyist to a competitor? Like maybe they want to compete for the first time. What would you tell them?
I'd say probably listen to the coaches for the most part, because if I can't cover everything in one sentence, because there's a lot, it's probably listen to your coaches, because there's a reason that they're a coach. You know, I think a lot of the younger guys in this generation forget that. You know, they like you talked about, like with Bruce Lee, right? Like nobody's going to sit there and ask John Danaher to go compete against Gordon Ryan. Right. Nobody's going to sit there and ask Freddie Roach to go box with Mike Tyson.
Mm-hmm.
They're coaches. They may not have been at the highest level themselves, but they understand what it takes to get there, obviously, just because of all the people that they've produced. But some of the guys nowadays sometimes forget that, just because they see it as like a transactional thing sometimes, where it's like, I'm paying you, so you should give me what I want when I want it, regardless of where I'm at. It's like, no, you're not ready for that advanced level of stuff if you haven't mastered basics first.
Right.
You're not ready for this level of competition if you haven't gotten your feet wet in this area first. We have that same conversation with the MMA guys a lot of the time. Like, we have requirements of them to do certain things to be able to jump in the cage. But you got to remember that the coaches don't do it necessarily because they're holding you back. You need to be coachable because they're trying to take care of you. If they're really looking out for your well-being, they're going to have a bunch of standards of things like that, like a checklist of things they're going to want you to cross off before you aspire to go to the next thing that you're wanting to go to. And that's because they're looking out for you. They want to see you get out of there healthy. Like one of the worst things that it pains me probably as much, and I think about it for weeks on end afterwards, is if a guy loses a fight. It's one of the worst things for me. Not necessarily because we lost. It's because I feel like I didn't do my job keeping them safe.
Right.
I look at their families afterwards, and I look at the kids or whoever it is that they have afterwards. I'm like, man, I should have done a better job for you. I should have done a better job for you. And that always weighs on my mind, because sometimes they want to jump the gun and get ahead of it. Like, I can't tell you what to do. I'm not your father. It's not a job. Yes, you are paying me, and maybe, just maybe you're going to get ahead of me and do something, and that's fine. Sometimes it happens, but trust the process. Listen to your coaches, because they're looking out for your well-being.
Yep.
Or I would hope they're looking out for your well-being if you have a decent coach. And then as far as competition, as much as often as possible within a healthy range, because like a lot of people try to get into, say, like even sport jiu-jitsu. Sport jiu-jitsu is a big one, because a lot of us get into jiu-jitsu, and the reason you start jiu-jitsu does not become the reason you continue it. A lot of guys start it for the health fitness aspects of it, or, mental release, stress release, things like that. They end up doing it for sport. Great. Do as many competitions as you can, get your feet wet in there, but don't forget that while you're doing those things of why you started doing it too. A return to some of that sometimes means that you still need to have fun with it.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I like to do competition now. I don't need to win a world championship. Neither does anybody else, or, need to be some guy that you see on BJJ Fanatics. If you're enjoying it and you're liking doing it, keep doing it. Just make sure you do it by a healthy means. Don't put your body out there to get beat up all the time. And, if you have to take some time off every now and then from competition, that's fine. That doesn't mean stop training. But if you need to take a little bit of a backseat to this or that for family issues and stuff like that, maybe do so. Just because at the end of the day, your family's going to be the one that's going to support you through the most of it. They're going to be the ones that give you a solid base and foundation for you to launch off of to go do these things. So if you're going to do them as much as possible within a healthy means, though. Find a good balance in there. That's a big one, because some guys go down that rabbit hole and they put a lot of their life to the back burner, and then later on problems arise and you're like, oh man, now I got to go fix all this stuff while I was busy chasing medals the entire time.
Yeah.
That can be a problem. That can be a problem. Just as much, everything needs to have balance.
Right. Yeah, man. Listening to your coaches, that's a big one for sure. It's so, especially with like the new age, right? Like they see things on social media, they're watching the UFC and they have these huge aspirations, but it's like, I can't tell you how many times someone's asked like, when can I compete? How long do I need to train for before I can compete? And it's like, jiu-jitsu, it's kind of one of those things. It's usually funny too, when someone asks me that question, I already know that they have an answer in their mind that they're looking for, like they already know. And so I usually just start with, you can compete whenever you want, just tap early.
That's
right?
funny,
Like,
I say the same thing.
compete whenever you want. It's just jiu-jitsu. As long as you're, mindful that you could get in there and get smoked and you tap early, you should be fine. But generally, you should probably wait like at least 6 months before you start just jumping into random tourneys. But some people have that in them, and it's like if you want to go ahead and jump in a jiu-jitsu tournament and just try your hand, jiu-jitsu is relatively, for the most, like you jump into a naga, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
As long as you tap and you're not sitting in arm blocks thinking you're going to escape, you should be good. MMA is completely different. But it's just so hard. You see so many people, like you can just see it in their eyes. Like they want you to tell them what they want to hear, It's like so hard as a coach.
Yeah. It's funny you said that. I said the exact word for word same line.
Yeah.
You can compete whenever you want.
Yeah.
The question is, are you going to be ready for it?
Right. Because they got their own answer already.
Yeah,
so.
they want to hear like the motivational Rocky speech or something like that. Yeah, go do it. I believe in you kind of stuff. It's like, I believe in you. It's just I believe in you with some time.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be some white belts that are on their 4th tournament, or they've been training for 2 years and they're trying to get a blue belt, So that's always a possibility. But man, one last question I ask for you, because you're running a successful gym out here in, I would say, maybe South Houston or Sugarland area.
Yeah, Sugarland, Stafford. We were originally in Sugarland, but we moved, honestly, like just 2 lights up.
Nice. And so Texas, Third Coast MMA, you guys are one of the staples here in Houston. You're a coach, you're an owner. I would say that you're in a position that most people definitely want to be in one day. So what would be your advice as someone who's making that transition of like a student to being a coach or an owner?
As far as, I would say maturity has a big role on the whole thing, but maturity in all realms. I think too, that one of the things that you got to remember if you're going to start a business and do all this stuff is like, because you're teaching all the information you've acquired over several years to most of the people that will be there with you for several years. But every now and then you're going to get somebody that's going to, jump ship, for whatever reason, whether it's in a good way they do it or a bad way. Don't take things personal.
Yep.
Don't take them personal, because it's not that they mean to do you wrong or anything like that. I think a lot of times, you see some of these people who sometimes start some of these businesses, or you and I have both heard stories like this before, that somebody will start training somewhere and then all of a sudden they quit and they pop up somewhere else training very near to that location, if not maybe on the other side or in the same city. And the instructor takes offense to it. And it's like, I understand it hurts, it sucks. But that's one person in a sea of students you have. Don't let that one person be the thing that sinks your ship. Like you have all these other people to focus on. You have so many people you could develop. There's probably somebody in that whole entire group that you're not even realizing is just so taken in by the entire process of like everything you're showing, and they believe in everything you're doing, that you're just not recognizing it because you're so busy focused on this one maybe thing that just happened, right? And it's like, man, don't take it personal, dude. Like you got all these other people. Focus on everybody, not just the one. That's hard to do, I think, sometimes, especially when you're talking about developing a business, because sometimes businesses require getting your name out there, and that requires having a competitor sometimes, at least in the industry anyway. But that being said, that only matters in the industry, that the fighter only matters to the fighters. How many people out there don't fight? How many people out there don't compete? The vast majority of them don't. Those are the people to start focusing on,
Right.
Develop those guys, teach them the things, just have an open mind with it, and don't get so focused sometimes on the competitions aspects of it for the business, because that does happen to us too. Like I run a lot of the fight team, so I have to deal with the fighters a lot, and it can be a little bit of an emotional process. My wife will tell you I'm up at like 2 or 3 in the morning watching fight videos and stuff like that, texting back and forth with these guys, and you get so caught up in watching and being focused on one individual that you forget about the mass. And like, oh yeah, I got to help this guy, help this guy, help this guy. Oh, this new kid just came in. This new mother-daughter group that just came in. Oh, this father-son group wants to sign up now and they want to train too. It's like, oh yeah, I got all these other people to worry about. Yes, I should focus on you, and I'm still focusing on you, still helping you, but I'm also going to help everybody else.
Yep.
You have to have the balance and divide the attention to everybody, not just to the one, because it does feel good to do that too, because you like working with that intensity. Because as a competitor, most of us that are competitors usually have some aspiration to eventually maybe do something of our own, but don't get lost in that competitive mindset that you forget about the business side of it, because that's going to play a role into it. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Just like the other stuff too. It's a huge balancing act, but don't take anything personal. It's business is business. Kind of like fighting is fighting, business is business.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like that hard like transition of like how martial arts is super traditional, and there's a lot of respect for your coach, and back in the day you wouldn't switch, right? It would just be you'd stay with that one person. But as martial arts has become more of a business, it's like that balance of it is a transaction at some point, and people want to pay someone else. You have to be you have to kind of it's that hard line of being able to detach yourself right from the emotional side, because you invest yourself, right? But you also can't not invest yourself. We've all heard stories also of like the coach who just kind of like, go do some laps. They're very dismissive, and I understand why people get that way. It's because they've put so much time into other people, and they leave.
Yeah,
but that's kind of just the business. It's like this. You kind of got to be grateful for every moment you get with someone.
Yeah.
And from my experience, how I've kind of dealt with that is just like being in the Marine Corps. I was in charge of individuals, and the people I was in charge of actually wanted to listen to the things that I had to say. So it's like, it feels really good when you're put into a leadership position and then people care about what you have to say. And then when you don't have that, man, you really miss it. You're like, man, I used to have like 10, 18-year-olds that were just ready to listen to what I had to say. Now I don't have that anymore. And then now that I'm back in that position, it's like, man, every day I get to teach somebody is a blessing. It's like if they move on and go somewhere else, or they move or they switch gyms, it's like, I'm glad I got to teach you for a little bit. Now I try to focus on is like, if they do go somewhere else, will they have gotten something from me? Will they be like, man, Scotty P, he showed me this leg lock. I've been using it ever since. Something along those lines, or it's like I make a lasting impression.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it too. Like one of the ones that personally, like story that I have for a couple of those is like, I think I've had about maybe five successful athletes that have transitioned to other sports through the influence of some of the things that specifically me and my father worked on them with. They're very successful too, going to like NCAA level. And you could take it personal that they have to go to college and all this stuff, because some people do, man. Like, you forget some of these kids that want to learn some of this stuff, they eventually have to go on and create a life for themselves too.
Right.
And I started doing this thing like years ago where if I see them starting to, I guess, build up a base in like an area or like an expertise in an area that may take them farther than probably any other thing they're going to do, whether it's with this or not. It's like, I tell them, I influence them right away. I tell them, hey, you need to go do that, man. You're good at this. Like, cause a lot of kids don't hear that hardly anymore.
Oh, for sure.
Like they don't hear anything about, hey, you're really, really good at this, man. You need to go do this, pursue this thing, cause there's a future here for you. You could be, if you wanted to be a coach in the future through this, that's fine. If you wanted to be a high level athlete with it, that's fine. You could probably do a bunch of stuff with this. Please go do that. I'm always going to be here when you want to come back. I love doing this, and that's, my role. This is my business. I'm always going to be here if you want to come back and seek it out, but please go do this thing. And then the same thing with the guys that want to seek out other stuff. We've had other people leave to go train at other places before, and it's like, there's a right way to do it. You tell them, hey, yes, I wish you best of luck. Please, if you ever in the area and you want to come back and train, please come see us.
Yeah.
I had a guy like that, he was what I consider probably one of the more successful ones. That we were training with him, and he became a really good boxer. And then he probably could have sought out a little bit of a path in boxing, but he also got into the Navy. And the Navy was like such a good thing for him because it gave him such a good structure that I was like, man, you should seek out the Navy. You should do this thing, man. Like, you should really see it out. Man, he ended up, doing really good, and like, had a daughter, and like got married and all this stuff. And like, he had his own life going on. And then he had an accident. He got into bikes, Harleys and things like that for a while. And he got into an accident, and he lost the use of a leg. So as I told him years before, like, I'm always here if you need it, ask questions or any of that stuff. He comes back, he says, what should I do? I want to do something. I can't box anymore. Try jujitsu, man. He showed up like the other night. He's been doing jujitsu for a little while now, about 6 months, but he showed up the other night to train with us for the first time. And my God, man, like, he's one of those guys that you could stick him in an athletic situation and he'd probably be able to just be good at it.
Yeah.
And he was, 6 months, and he's rolling like he's like a seasoned blue belt. And I'm like, man, this is awesome. Like, okay, cool. Like, I'm glad I helped you out with it just for the little bit and pushing you in that direction. But still, just to see the fact, like, he took me up on the offer that, hey, if it's here, it's here, like that's my job as a coach and a business owner.
Absolutely.
That's inspiring more than anything else to me. That really, that's probably better than any medal or anything like that I could help him do something,
For sure. Yeah, 100%. Well, Jason, I had you on the podcast for like an hour and a half, dude. Appreciate your time. Thank you. I'm definitely sure my audience will be able to pull something useful out of this conversation, but I appreciate you. Hopefully we can trade sometime.
Yes, sir.
See you guys.